Hello and welcome to another Catholic Reflection video. We are streaming live today. I wanted to share some of my thoughts and emotions concerning Daniel Naroditsky. Now, some of you may not know, even though this is a Catholic channel, and I've also done retro speedrunning gaming. I have been a fan of chess since I was a kid, and I've played the game on and off. I love doing puzzles. It's very fun. I always watch streams occasionally, YouTube videos, things of that nature. I got a bad memory, so it's really neat to watch these guys do what they do. Most notably, the player that I watched the most was Daniel Naroditsky. Usually I didn't want to catch him live, but I did watch probably over 100 hours of his speed runs from start to finish on his YouTube channel. I never knew Daniel personally. I never sent him a message, an email, never commented on his videos. I was an admirer from afar. But having watched him for so many years and for so many hours, his death for some reason struck me in a way that I didn't think would. I've been quite down, quite depressed for several days. I think it's because as I watched him reason and got glimpses of his personality here and there, I kind of saw in him part of myself, a kind of kindred spirit where we're both generally good-natured, very diplomatic, very very kind. And I think in part his death bothers me because even though it has not been disclosed, the cause of death, and whether it's true or not, I have suspected that it may be due to suicide, though I hope not, because suicides are usually much harder on the families and other people. But because I have suspected it, I have a personal connection to that has been stirred up within me. When I was 10 years old, my father committed suicide, and it was very devastating, and at a time where my cognitive abilities was not fully developed, nor was my emotions ready to be able to cope with that level of trauma. And if this is indeed the case with Daniel, it's gonna tear people up, particularly family. Hey, don't you know that I love you? In a God of a baby. Don't you know? So it ended up striking me at a level I did not think that it would strike me, because like I said, I had never had a conversation with Daniel himself. I was an admirer from afar. Nevertheless, I've had opportunity over the last few days, and I have delayed making any sort of video sharing any of my thoughts or feelings about the matter until after I had the opportunity to process it myself and watch some videos, Daniel's last stream, other people's responses. All of those things were, I think, necessary for me. I wanted to grasp at as much data as I possibly could in order to process it. And I think that's important. So some people are like that. I remember when I was 10 and I was first told about the suicide of my father, I did not cry right away. I asked a series of questions. I wanted to know when and where and how, and I needed information. I needed a picture in my head. And once I was able to ask those questions and get those answers, it helped it become more real to me. And then I was able to begin the grieving process. I remember crying quite heavily after I had gathered that information. Today I took some time to watch the last hour of Daniel's final stream. Some people had uploaded it to YouTube to preserve it. And it was very difficult to watch. But I forced myself to do it because if for no other reason, I wanted to be able to, at least what has been preserved, what may be some of his final hours. And I owed him that. And I also wanted to see his mental state and what was going on. And it was very heart-wrenching to watch. While I was watching it, I was texting a friend, and he had already watched it, and I was sharing my thoughts as it was unfolding, and what Daniel seemed to have been going through, and I've had many thoughts on this, some of which maybe some people won't like, but particularly for me, looking at this through the lens of my father and assuming that he did in fact commit suicide. It's an assumption. I do not know for sure if this is the case. It seems to be the most plausible in my mind at the moment, so I will be speaking from within that framework. Whether it's right or it's wrong, it's the paradigm through which I'm processing all of this on a personal level. One of the things that actually struck me when I was watching that stream, and I watched the 2.5 hours, is some of the comments that Daniel made concerning that it's his reason for getting out of bed in the morning. In other videos, he has said that this is my honor, this is my reputation, this was, for all intents and purposes, his life. It's my understanding he learned chess when he was 6. His father introduced him to the game, and he seemed to have a knack for it, was a prodigy, got chess coaches and all of that. And part of what popped up into my mind when I started thinking about this is the amount of personal sacrifice that we engage in order to achieve greatness, in order to become one of the best at anything in the world, the amount of time and sacrifice and obsession that is required to do it. And I think sometimes we forget, like even when we watch, say, the Olympics or sports or anything like that, we are watching a finely tuned individual who, over the course of time, had internalized and this one thing, and it carves out not just a part of the personality, it can become the whole of their personality. It becomes how they identify themselves in this world, how they can even come to think of themselves as having value in relation to it. So much so that when it is attacked, when it is challenged, that it cuts to the very core of the individual in such a way that they feel like they are losing themselves. They feel like they're losing their very purpose in being. And I enjoyed the film Finding Bobby Fischer, which I forget the name of the guy that it was based on, but just how parents end up pushing or and sometimes nurturing a gift that a child has, even as young as age 2 or 3, and their whole lives become oriented around this one thing for so long. And this in and of itself is not a bad thing. I think it can be healthy when parents see that their child is good at something, that they are going to nurture it, that they're going to invest in it, they are going to try to give that child the best opportunities to be able to grow in that particular area. And this is not only true of someone like Tiger Woods, who was swinging a golf club so young, where it just becomes the path at such a young age, where they are set on. And I kind of heard that language coming from Daniel, where and I'm not quoting this, but it's his reason for getting up in the morning. It's part of who he is, his identity. I don't think that anybody could watch videos of him talking about the cheating accusations from Kramnik and others without hearing within that chess was his life. So much so that if it wasn't part of his life, he may not even know who he even is, because it's been the obsession, it's been the focus for so long, for good or for ill. And it has also bothered me on a personal level, the amount of accusations and attacks that he had received and endured. At the end of his final stream, he talks about the lingering effects. Like he didn't want to play offline because he was afraid that people would criticize him or try to use that as evidence that he was cheating if he was actually doing well off stream. It bothered him so much that at one time he had like 5 cameras on himself. it bothered him so much that when people weren't playing and simply auto-aborting games against him during that stream, he very well could have. He said he didn't understand, why are people doing this? And I suspect that eventually he probably thought it was because people didn't want to play him because they thought that he was a cheater, but it was probably because maybe word was getting around that he was not doing so well and you might not want to play him. That's mere conjecture. I don't know how quickly the word can get around on Twitch and stuff like that, but people do talk, and you know, that could happen out of respect. I know that he had queued into Hans Niemann twice, and he didn't want to play. I think that was also true of Bortnick and some others. So I give them credit for not playing him in such a state, because he was on a bit of a losing streak, but he did seem to play better when his friends actually came over. Probably about 15 to 19 minutes before the end of his final stream, friends rang the doorbell twice and then eventually came in and were trying to get him to. This was just shortly before 2 a.m. his time on that day. We're trying to get him to stop streaming, you know. And that whole hour was so difficult to watch. Even when his friends showed up, he was confused as to why they were there. This isn't right, he said several times. He just seemed so distraught in his face. I've never seen him so distraught over the course of all the 100 plus hours of video footage that I had watched. It wasn't the same Daniel that I saw do his speedruns with all the analysis and everything. A lot of the early part of the stream was him fielding questions and dialoguing with people about Kramnik. This grew in his mind. It consumed him, and he tried to believe that people were coming from a good place, that they were acting out of good faith, that he could reason with them, and found himself surprised that people could, even with very little evidence, come to believe these things about him. And it just tore him up. Now, not to talk about myself, but I am intimately familiar with a little bit of what he was experiencing in terms of there being relationships or a people or a reputation that ends up being drawn into controversy, or people that end up treating him poorly or thinking poorly of him. It's a very difficult thing to deal with. I dealt with this, 5 to 7 years ago, where I created Retro Craze, which was a gaming only retro live speedrunning team on Twitch, where I wanted to help connect retro streamers and all of that on the basis of gaming commentary, speedruns, gaming content, things of that nature. But I eventually became attacked and criticized, and as a result, my reputation was dragged through the mud, through social media and stuff like that. I wasn't a top, in the elite of, the top 50 chess players or top 100 all time or something like that. But I was a very notable contributor and world record holder and innovator regarding NES gaming, and I had a reputation among people. And when I started losing that at the hands of people, which was unfair, accusations concerning my character and everything else, where I was demonized and so on and so forth, it didn't feel very good. It was unjust. And all I wanted was just to keep gaming. That was my bottom line. I recognized that people from all walks of life could participate in this one thing without fighting over other things that are non-gaming related. So when I would listen to Daniel talk about how there was an entire Discord, dedicated to analyzing him and critiquing him and trying to find evidences for his cheating and stuff like that, and that his reputation was being attacked, his livelihood was being attacked, I felt that in his voice. And I connected with that because I have experienced that myself. I used to stream to 70 plus people, I used to be working towards full-time streaming and was very dedicated to what I was doing. So even though I didn't experience the same thing and to the same degree, there's enough approximation to what he was going through where I felt like I was watching myself as he talked about just how much it weighed on him and how he tried reasoning with people, and I just knew as he was saying those things, I'm like, no, these people aren't acting in good faith. These people are actually out to get you. And yes, it is irrational. It's very emotional driven. It's very ideological. And you just have to come to recognize that some people are like that. And they're going to group together and they're going to attack. That's what some people do. Now, he said he first tried to ignore it, but it just continued to persist. I guess this was going on for at least over a year, these accusations. And I think one of the things that kind of bothered me a lot, and this is of course a Catholic channel, is that he had engaged his intellect in pursuits of this game, and we mustn't forget that the ultimate pursuit of our intellect arrives at God, arrives at a grasp of reality and how things are in themselves, that things have purpose, that we have purpose. It's ultimately theistic. And I don't know what he thinks of such things. I think one time somebody asked him on stream what he thought about the afterlife, and he didn't give an answer to it, but I don't know what his thoughts were on such matters. He was first and foremost a grandmaster. Apparently, I think at the time he became a grandmaster, he was the youngest whoever became a grandmaster at that time. I don't know if that's been surpassed or not. Perhaps it has. I wouldn't doubt it. People are pretty smart. People are starting earlier and earlier. But, and I also saw in the fact that he was being attacked, even being bullied and harassed. It wasn't a kind of situation where those who bullied him eventually just go away, or you could just block the handful of people who are doing it and your chat becomes clean and non-aggressive, and you can kind of filter people out. He had such a large platform. He streamed to the broadest audience possible in relation to chess, that for all intents and purposes he didn't have at his disposal the opportunity to be able to filter out a few negative voices. And these were coming both from English and Russian speaking sources, and he had to deal with this. His mental health definitely deteriorated under the weight of bullying. And unfortunately, when an individual or a group of individuals engage in bullying, for some reason they always think themselves to be justified in what they're doing, that they are serving some higher cause, that they are demanding a sense of justice and ensuring it in relation to integrity of the game and so on and so forth. But it becomes an injustice when an innocent man, perhaps one who could not handle the ongoing, lingering effects over a period of time before they broke. That last hour of his final stream was gut-wrenching, but I forced myself to watch it. And I'm glad that some of his friends showed up to try to convince him to get off stream. Because whatever he was going through, he needed assistance. It wasn't something he was going to be able to do on his own. Even when his friends showed up, he wanted to just continue streaming. I don't quite know precisely his reasoning for it. Whether or not he didn't recognize the problem or was honest enough with himself that he needed help, that he couldn't do this on his own. He needed his friends in that moment and in other moments, that it wasn't going to be something that he was going to be able to do in complete isolation without the help of those who care about him the most. And I don't know if that was his reaction to his friends coming over was indicative of the way he saw help from other people. But it seemed to spiral down. Losing took on a whole new meaning to him. He genuinely thought that if he lost in some context and won in other contexts, that all it would do is feed into the accusation of his cheating. He said this at the end of his stream, that he didn't want to keep playing. He didn't want to play off off stream. And his friend rightly said, you have nothing to prove to anyone. I don't know if that's exactly what it might be. You don't have anything to prove to these people. I think that's what it was. You can watch it to verify. And that's true. I think perhaps for a very long time, and I could be wrong, when an individual for a very long time who is really good natured, he could be friends with anybody. He's such a nice guy. Everybody loves him. And they experience this kind of support and connection to a broad range of people for a very long time. Has the respect of anyone who cares about chess. And all of a sudden, he begins to perceive that this begins to dwindle. That there are those who begin to turn on him. I can't even begin to... And what ends up happening is he just simply absorbs it. He absorbs it. He doesn't deflect it. You know? I like Hikaru's attitude. I actually wish I had more of Hikaru's attitude when it comes to naysayers and people saying stuff like that. But unfortunately, I don't. And I don't think Daniel was that way either. In fact, he said him ignoring something was his version of Hikaru's F off, you know, kind of thing. And I think Daniel tried so hard to try to hold on to those connections that he had, that more diplomatic, more contemplative approach that is more relational. It appeals to the emotions a little bit more, and I think he probably could have benefited from that. The mental strength of Hikaru, his New York attitude of being able to brush things off, and he didn't deflect. He absorbed this. He took it to the very core of his being. And it absolutely crushed him. And it's hard to see somebody who is that open, that vulnerable, and then have people take advantage of that and just go for blood and just keep attacking him. Now, there probably are cheaters out there, and you know, fair play is something that needs to be considered in the online forum. But never once did it ever enter my mind that Daniel ever cheated, ever. And I believe him when he says that he never did, and he never would. He would sooner have something really bad happen to him than to actually cheat. And even while he was being attacked by people like Kramnik, he continued to be gracious and speak respectfully towards them. It's very impressive. And I hope that we all can be a little bit more like that. With that said, we also need to recognize when certain people are not worth our time, and that certain people's ideas are not substantive, they're not valuable, and they don't belong in our mental landscape. It doesn't belong there. Giving too much to what people say about us, taking their crap and taking it too seriously, gives way too much value to what other people say about us. Whatever happened to what I think of me? What my closest friends think of me? What God thinks of me is the most important thing. These people on the internet, these people that you may run across, these people that you've been associated with, one degree or another, these acquaintances, there's all kinds of people on the internet who run their mouth, who say all kinds of things. But for Daniel, this wasn't just a random person on the internet. It was one of his heroes. Someone he deeply respected and enjoyed and was excited about playing. And I think that cut him even deeper. But my advice to people is to be like Hikaru. Have off. Just do your thing. People don't want to watch the stream. And I think Daniel even tried this. You could see this a bit in the streams where, nobody's telling you have to have the stream up. And of course, he's right. Basically, when it comes down to, it comes down to it, other people in the chess community don't have the jurisdiction in regulating what is and is not a cheating event. The who's who of people who run Lichess or chess.com or FIDE, they'll take care of it. If somebody's cheating, they're going to be found out. Don't worry. You could help. Like I know this is Kramnik's thing, and I get it. Let's set up Proctor. Let's have accountability. I know what that is about in terms of processes in place, criteria by which a thing is evaluated for the sake of adjudicating whether or not an authentic performance has taken place. I used to moderate leaderboards on speedrun.com to this end. And often it was I who was the one who was more stringent. I was the one who was more strict. I was the one making arguments for how emulator is different than console in RNG outcomes and the things of that nature. I had this originalist conception of original hardware only, and that's what I did. I would practice on the EverDrive, but then I would do my performance on an actual cart. Everything that I tried to do was strictly within this kind of originalist mindset, with the eye to the future, knowing that maybe one day we don't have any original hardware anymore. Maybe all we have are emulators. Maybe all we have are third-party hardware that we can utilize. All right, assuming, right? So I get the need for those things to be in place, but it's not for us to attack individuals, right? It's not for us to attack those individuals directly. We need to work within that system. You have a way that cheating could be minimized. Talk to FIDE about it. Talk to chess.com. Talk to Lichess. Be innovative. Come up with ideas of how those things can be caught. Because if you, that would be like the authentic governing authority over those areas. They have the jurisdiction to adjudicate those kinds of issues. But to take it upon oneself and a kind of vigilantism, I can't speak right now. In order to go after individual people and try to create a list of reasons why you think they're cheating, or put together some sort of evidence package, I mean, it's all well and good. Like if for some reason that is your thing, you really like doing that, don't post it all over the internet. Put together an evidence package, submit it to the governing authorities, whether it be chess.com or FIDE or whatever it may be, and make your case. And if after adjudicating such a case, they do not think that cheating has taken place or it's not conclusive, move on. But you also have to trust those processes. And I think too often what ends up happening is people take to Twitter and they just start blasting. They start saying things. People start doing their own cheat tests with other people's content in Discord conversations and so on and so forth. And they just end up becoming breeding grounds for conspiracy theories. You know, this person's in on this and this person's doing that, and I don't think that's healthy. If you like chess, just play chess. Sit there, play the game. Study the game. Put your ideas into practice. Think about your next move. Study games from the past. Watch, you know, the most recent chess tournament. Watch those games. Listen to the commentators. Enjoy it. It just sit there and enjoy it. If you got good ideas, tell FIDE. Now, I know some people have gone even as far as say, well, Kramnik should be stripped of his title and stuff like that. Now, I've ran into these types of arguments before. For example, I had the world record in several different games, and people would make the argument, well, because Chambers thinks this about this point in philosophy, therefore we should remove all of his times and scores from the leaderboard. That kind of stuff. It has absolutely nothing to do with the character of the person. It just doesn't. If a person followed the rules, they put in the work, they earn the title, it's their title. They have a right to it. That doesn't mean that Kramnik wasn't acting in bad faith, that he wasn't acting proper and respectfully, that it's totally separate issues, and I don't think FIDE can really adjudicate those kinds of things. But I get the sentiment. I kind of understand, you know, When an individual has engaged in behaviors that we think are not fit for society, then they should be completely washed from the minds of everybody in society. And there is a distinction there. So I do disagree with that, but I do think perhaps at the most, because I don't think FIDE can really do anything in relation to things that Kramnik may have posted on Twitter or now X, or in a Discord or anything like that, or what people say on Twitch. It's not their platforms. It's not things that they have any kind of authority over. They can't do anything along those lines. I don't think there's. I don't even think that there's even room for any sort of investigation or anything like that. But socially speaking, what we're going to end up seeing is just pro-Kramnik, anti-Kramnik sentiments, and people are going to argue online about it. How do I know this? Because this is exactly what I went through some years ago. Like I said, not the same thing, not to the same degree. But people didn't like things that I said or things that I did. I was reported to Twitch, to Discord, to Twitter. Nothing happened. Because people can have conversations. In my case, there was a right for a gaming-only retro live Twitch team. There's nothing wrong with it. So there isn't anything anybody can really do. You know, even if I were mean to people, which I wasn't, there's still nothing that they could really do. Unless, like on those platforms at the very least, if I had violated community guidelines or any of the norms that they had established, terms and conditions, then there's absolutely nothing that can be done. So I know people don't want to hear that now, but don't be surprised when nothing's going to happen. Nothing's going to happen at all. And I also know that some people have been going on about, well, where were his friends when he was struggling? People were concerned. I'm sure his friends had conversations with him about things over the course of time. You know, maybe they expected more of a public defense. I can understand that. When I was being attacked on Twitter some years ago, where I was in this very small bubble, where tweets against me were thousands of retweets. Everything I had to say, no matter how reasoned, were getting ratioed because it was all within this particular bubble. And through all of that, I forget what my point was. I think I was going somewhere with that. I think I was talking about Kramnik again. But I was talking about public support. Yes. So when this was happening, nobody else, not exclusively, right? That there were a few people, to their credit, who stepped up and said, "Well, Chambers didn't do anything wrong. He's just creating a gaming only team." And so there were a few people, but most people don't want to get involved because they don't want the crosshairs on them. This is a very common phenomenon, especially when, well, Chambers just wasn't worth it. My platform wasn't really huge. I didn't have a crowd equal to the crowd that was coming against me. So the few people that were there, they just don't want to be involved. And this kind of thing can in fact happen. Hey JKO, welcome in. It's a strange phenomenon. So I don't, especially if Kramnik and others were hell-bent on accusing people of cheating, even people who might be innocent. They certainly didn't want to get into those crosshairs. They didn't want to receive the same treatment that Daniel was receiving. Now, some people may call this cowardice. Some may call it prudence. I think it's an individual decision of just how much they're willing to put on the line, how much they're willing to sacrifice for somebody else. Are they willing to take the hits? Are they willing to take it in the face? You know, and some people aren't. I think, for example, though, if there were enough voices to counteract these sorts of things, more people are likely to be involved, because then they feel like they're part of a group and they're not just an individual saying, okay, I'm going to throw my lot in with him, and then they just completely get destroyed. And I think, especially when it comes to something like a reputation or a career in chess, the last thing that somebody wants to do is get in the crosshairs of a group of people who are hell-bent on finding cheaters. You start messing with that, and all of a sudden they're coming after you, and they think you're cheating, and then they're scouring your videos and trying to find examples that they could read in their bias and think, oh, he definitely cheated on this move. Nobody would possibly make such a move for his rating. Like, I can't have a flash of genius, you know, in this moment. You know, something just clicks in this moment. Yeah, there's a lot of things that happen in relationships that are unfair. There's a lot of these small injustices that occur, and how people end up mistreating other people who might not deserve it. And even then, there's the question of, what does a person deserve? Especially when it comes to the term justice. What are they really seeking? They're seeking to be able to engage in some form of retribution, retributive justice, that they think this person is cheated, they think this person should be punished. But how does it normally work? Especially if it's official. It's usually some governing body. It's the government who has the proper authority to be able to administer justice, to have a proportionate retribution, to punish. But there also exists some sort of social element in all of this as well, which starts at the most fundamental of societal building blocks, which is the family. You know, in terms of your mom and dad, my mom and dad used to discipline me. But I think sometimes, even though we recognize mom and dad had the authority in our homes to punish us, and if you break the law, you commit a crime, the government can punish you. You know, you can be imprisoned, or, you know, you can be fined. There's all kinds of things that can occur. But when people take it upon themselves, and I think we kind of see this sometimes, where people think that they have some sort of social right to gain up on an individual and to exact some form of justice by tearing down their reputation. Now, for many years, I have had difficulty trying to know the line between I'm sharing a difficult experience I had with this other person with my friend in a way that doesn't reveal some fault about the other person to my friend. Because I want to be fair. At some point, there does need to be some sort of where we can have somebody's confidence. There are our confidant, someone whom we can confide in, where we can share our thoughts and feelings that we might have concerning somebody to that individual. But do it in a way that's still respectful of not revealing any kind of fault that isn't known generally to our friend. Unless, of course, it's the kind of fault that is directly against you. And I think that's the distinction. If somebody treats you poorly, I think you can share with your friend that I think I was treated poorly by this individual. There is in that sense some social consequence. But I think what we see online is this kind of find out somebody's fault and then reveal it to everybody, for everybody and their grandma to see. And that's the sin of detraction. You're purposely going out of your way to reveal some fault that's unknown to people who, in a sense, have no right to it, with the sole purpose of tearing down their reputation. And that is when it becomes problematic. But some people don't have those distinctions in place between how you would have a conversation with one of your friends versus how you're making some public post that the whole world will see, and it's on the internet forever. I think there's distinctions to be drawn in terms of what is a just thing to do. For some people, they think that if a person's fault is so bad that they can just put it all over the internet. I don't agree with that. Generally, because I believe in the principle of subsidiarity, that everything, even in the social sphere, needs to be handled at the lowest level possible. So let's say there's some kid at school. Let's say I'm 12 years old, right? What would that be? 6th grade? Something like that. And this other kid does this thing in class against me or something like that. You don't take it to the internet. You take it to the teacher. It used to be that moms used to talk to each other when their kids got in a fight. Now it's all over social media. Everything has its proper place. And there's a certain wisdom and prudence in progressing. It's kind of like the chain of command. You know, in the military, or I like watch Star Trek a lot. I love The Next Generation. It's one of my favorite series. There's chain of command. There's a way things that are supposed to be handled, and it's always going to be at the lowest level possible. So, like, for example, like, if Daniel was cheating, which I don't believe he was, if he was, then it's his closest friends that need to hold him accountable. Be like, don't do that again. Okay? If he refuses, well, then they could go up one level. Okay? And there's prudence in this process of progressing through the hierarchy of the spheres of accountability, I will call it. And we need to have a better sense of this. Because there never should be a case where on the internet, one man is accusing, like one grandmaster is accusing another grandmaster of cheating. On the internet, if you have an issue with that you think that you have been wronged, or you think other people are being wronged, then there is a very specific process that you need to take. And because what ends up happening is you have this sense of being a vigilante, of demanding justice, and you go into the social sphere, and you're going to do this one thing. You're going to blast this guy. You're going to call him out. You're going to hold him accountable. And all that's going to do is circumvent the proper process that should be taken, whether it's by chess.com or it's by FIDE or Lichess or whatever the governing body is, who have the authority to adjudicate such things. And you end up drawing to yourself, like lightning to a rod, a certain amount of people who are just irrational enough to jump on your bandwagon, and all of a sudden you have created some sort of social trend that is, well, once again, hell-bent on doing this thing. Trying to demand justice from somebody who may not even be guilty, but they have come to believe themselves that it is the case. There are many examples of such things. Now, far from this actually being... what's interesting is people are doing this out of a sense of justice, but they end up going about it in a way that's so unjust that it fails to encapsulate the fullness of what we would envision when we think of justice. We have to understand that our ways of obtaining justice must in of itself be just. And too often we engage in unjust ways of trying to achieve what we think ought to be the outcomes. And we end up hurting people in that process. And I think that is what has happened here with Daniel. He deserved much better. And let's be honest, it's not uncommon. And like I said, I assume that this may have been a suicide. I could be wrong. Okay. There's always the sense in which those who survive an experience of suicide, not those who attempt it and fail, but those who are left behind in the case of a suicide, they, in fact, I'm not even sure if I could put this on YouTube using the word suicide. What are people saying now? Unalive themselves? To try to not have their language caught. But it should be something that can be discussed openly. It should not be censored. There shouldn't be any censorship in relation to something so serious as this. Great, I lost my train of thought again. What was I saying? Having a beer is a double-edged sword. I lose my train of thought more often, but I tend to be much more articulate. My thoughts seem to flow a lot better. In relation to, I was talking about demands of justice, taking justice in one's own hands. But then I started talking about suicide. I shouldn't have taken that rabbit trail of whether or not I should use that word or not. Once I went down that hole, I lost the flow of what I was saying. Well, this is less of a stream and more of a video that I'm intending to upload. So, I think I can give some concluding thoughts. Some concluding thoughts in all this. I do think that when it comes to the world of chess, it can become an obsession for some people. Sometimes at such a young age, one can be directed to the kind of obsession that, in a sense, is necessary to become the best of the best. And all the sacrifices that entails. Though I at times question these sorts of things, because it becomes to define who they are, and especially at such a young age, that one can be more prone to associating that with their core of their beings. So much so that when they lose that, they feel like they're losing themselves. And this should not be the case. You know, it kinds of reminds me of some form of inception. At some point in our earliest development, an idea is planted. And our whole self just grows and develops around it. Sometimes not even recognizing that the idea was actually bad to begin with. That I am my reputation. If I lose that, I lose myself. I don't know who I am. I wouldn't know who I am. It's why I get up out of bed in the morning. Now, I'm not trying to be insensitive. No, I do feel and have felt a great deal amount of sadness over the loss of Daniel. I say this with having the capacity to compartmentalize my emotions and be able to think objectively and think logically about some of the issues that are involved without having them all enmeshed, without their distinctions being blurred, and without emotion clouding the issues that are involved. So if it sounds like I'm being insensitive, I'm not. I'm just trying to think about the issues without the emotion clouding it. So as I shared, it was very difficult watching the final hour of his final stream. It was very heart-wrenching to see the level of mental stress that he was under. And there's so many moving parts to it. There really are. There's his upbringing, and then there's the question of, with that upbringing, there's the question of, should parents be driving kids as much as they do into certain areas? And I think how they do it may be important so as to protect them later in life when things fail, or if somebody's an athlete. Guess what happens? Your pitching arm goes out. You're done. You still have to have a life outside of baseball, even though you've been throwing that thing since you were 1, and you've been playing baseball since you can remember. It's just what you do. It's just who you are. And they have to be able to break their arm and still be able to live their life without struggling to cope with, well, who are they now? Well, are they going to turn to drugs? Are they going to turn to addictions? Are they going to kill themselves? What's going to happen? And I think how these things become instilled in us makes a difference. Parenting is very important. Now, people are going to hear that and they're going to think, oh my goodness, Chambers is blaming Daniel's parents for this? No, I'm not saying that. I'm talking about a concept in a vacuum. And I'm raising the question of, is this an example of that? I've obviously touched upon internet bullying. I've talked about justice. I've talked about see, that's going to upset people too. Me saying Kramnik shouldn't be stripped of his titles. No. He could be the biggest jerk. He could go out and take out children at mass, and take out 20 to 50 people or something like that. And yeah, he still achieved what he achieved. And I want the records to demonstrate the exactitude of reality, not some filtered, watered down list of only people that we approve of and we consider decent people. That's a totally different issue. So yeah, I'm willing to say things that other people aren't willing to say. I don't know what more his friends could have done for him. That's for them to assess for themselves. Like me, I could say, well, I kind of wish now that I would have messaged them at one point or something, but survivors of suicide, they always feel like, or we always end up getting into that conversation about what we should have done, what we could have done, stuff like that. And sometimes people have guilt. They have genuine, I think it's false guilt in most cases, where one thinks they should have said this. They maybe they should have went over and visited him more. Maybe they should have just fill in the blank. What could we have done differently? What could have prevented this? Was he struggling with a mental illness? Was he struggling with a mental, despite this? Or was he struggling with mental illness because of this? What was done? What could have been done? We ask all of these questions, and we do this all the time. This is the same with school shootings. We're always asking, okay, what can we learn from this? What could we have known prior? What were some red flags? And a lot of times, and here's the thing, for anybody who is struggling right now with any sense of guilt in relation to this, of what you think you could or should have done, school shootings still exist. People are still doing bad things despite red flags and laws and restrictions and everything else. At some point, even when it sounds bad, the responsibility of this act, if in fact Daniel killed himself, was in the hands of Daniel. We might not like that. We don't want to hear that. He needed to have reached out. He needed to have been even more vulnerable. He needed to be intellectually honest with himself and emotionally open with his friends. Now, I'm also going to say something that other people won't say. And that is, sometimes, no matter what, you just can't prevent it. It was just something that was going to happen, and nobody could do anything about it. It's not your fault. There isn't something that you could have done. So we have to do a fair assessment of ourselves in that regard. Because, and I know it sounds bad. It kind of sounds like I was blaming Daniel for himself. All right. There are many contributing factors. The act of his own personal intellect and will towards that end that ended himself lies within his personal responsibility. And I know it sounds bad. When my father ended his life when I was 10 years old, I used to think, if my father was thinking of me at the time, he wouldn't have done it. If I was exceptional, if I was a prodigy in something, if I was so amazing it gave him an avenue by which he could live vicariously through me and draw some sort of value from that he would not have ended his life. And at the end of the day, I have to come to the conclusion that it wasn't because I wasn't good enough. It was because he was troubled. And he was troubled for a while. And maybe at some point there was a way out of it for himself. But at some point, he lost it. He lost the battle, and he may not even recognize that he was coming to that point before it was too late. That's why I think it's vitally important that we understand that the fault of some of these things cannot be assumed by ourselves. You know, was what Kramnik and others doing a factor? Yes. Was what we were not doing to stand up for him in public, or as friends, what we were saying or not saying, and hanging out with them, sitting with them? You know, that was a factor. But when the day is done, despite the horrible outcome, we have to put everything in its own place, in its proper place, and only take what is ours, and be willing to place what belongs to others out of our own hands. So we're not owning it, we're not internalizing it within our own selves. It's not ours to own, and that's okay. It's okay for it not to be ours to own. It's okay to be somebody else's fault, and us not have any control over the will of others. I don't know what was going through my dad's mind when he dropped to his knees and put a gun to his head in that driveway that May 1st, 1991. I don't know what was going through his head. I don't know what mental state he was in. I don't know what justifications he had. I don't know what he was going through. I was 10. How could I? But nobody else pulled that trigger. Part of me hopes that what happened to Daniel was an accident. Like he slipped in the shower, and it's just circumstantial that he was going through a rough time. Or an accidental overdose on something that he didn't intend. He did intend to engage in an act in an attempt to cope, but didn't intend this particular outcome. I would like that to be the case. But if it's not, and in a moment of weakness, in a moment of irrationality, if he did have this flash of intent that was a moment sufficient to bring about this outcome, even if a moment later he would have regretted it, like how a man could jump off a building and immediately on his way down regrets what he did. He acted compulsively. And sometimes you can't always anticipate when one will reach a moment of compulsion. We can't always be there for it. I think that's all I have to say today. I think I'm going to upset everybody in one way or another, but I think if you set your emotions aside and just allow your intellect to flow around a little bit with some of the thoughts I've shared today, they might be helpful in the long run to sift through it, process the emotion involved. So thanks for watching, everybody. God bless, and we'll see you again. Stay in prayer with all of this. Continue to be mindful of all those affected by this horrible tragedy. Rest in peace, Daniel Naroditsky.